Frost hadn't come yet, but the air already smelled of it. Odessa Kirkendall knelt in the dirt at 5 in the morning, a lantern hung on a fence post beside her, counting leaves by touch. 98 hills of tobacco climbed the hillside behind her house like green stairsteps, each stalk taller than a grown man, each leaf thick as a bath towel. She pinched a sucker from a stem, rolled it between her fingers, and tucked it into her apron pocket. Her hands were tar-black to the wrist. She hummed something low, something with no words left in it. Down at the gate, a truck slowed. The driver leaned out, squinting at the plants, then at the old woman working them alone. He didn't stop. Nobody stopped anymore, not since the co-op quit buying and every other hillside in the county had gone back to fescue and cattle. Odessa didn't look up. She had 98 plants and one October coming, and there wasn't a soul in Menifee County who thought either one of those things would save her. What the whole county failed to notice was written right there in the shape of the leaf, thick-veined, dark as a bruised plum, nothing like the pale, burly growing 2 ridges over. Nobody asked why an old woman was fire-curring tobacco, nobody smoked anymore. They just laughed and kept driving. If you're watching this from your porch, your truck, or your lunch break, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me what part of the country you're watching from tonight. I read everyone, and I promise you, this story earns the time it takes. Frenchburg sits low in the folds of Menifee County, Kentucky, where the ridges rise so steep the cattle graze sideways, and the mail carrier still calls ahead before climbing certain driveways in the rain. It is a county of 6,000 people, and considerably more hollows than roads. The courthouse clock has run 10 minutes slow since 1974, and nobody has bothered to fix it, because in a place like this, time moves at its own pace regardless of what the clock says. Odessa Kirkendall had lived on Sturgill Ridge for 51 years, in a white farmhouse her husband Talmadge built board by board the summer they married. Talmadge had died 4 winters back, quiet in his sleep, leaving her 62 acres, a leaning tobacco barn, and a coffee can of black, oily seed he'd saved every season since 1968. He used to call it Kirkendall Black. Nobody grew it anymore. Nobody grew much of anything anymore. Not since the government bought out the tobacco quotas and half the county switched to beef or gave up farming altogether. Every Thursday, Odessa drove her rusted Ford to the Frenchburg feed store for chicken scratch and stamps. And every Thursday, Vernie Coy behind the counter found some new way to needle her about it. Still babying them Baki plants, Odessa. Man selling combines in Owingsville told me Burley's dead. Dead as fried chicken at a funeral. Vernie meant it kindly, in the way small towns mean cruelty kindly, wrapping it in a laugh so it goes down easier. Odessa just paid for her stamps and said nothing back. Her grandson Wendell Sturgill remembered a particular morning from that spring, not because anything happened, but because nothing did. His grandmother stood at the kitchen window before sunup, coffee going cold in her hand, looking out at the hillside like she was reading something written there. She did that most mornings. He never asked what she saw. He only knew she'd stand there until the light came up gold over the ridge, and then she'd go out to the plants like the day had given her permission. Then came the letter. Cream envelope, county seal, the kind that made even brave men's hands go cold. Delinquent property taxes, $4,200, owed since Talmadge's passing, compounding every quarter Odessa had quietly let slide while she buried a husband and learned to run a farm alone. The letter gave her until October the 15th. After that, her 62 acres would be posted on the courthouse steps at auction, sold to the highest bidder, same as furniture at an estate sale. She read it twice, folded it small, and put it in the flour tin where she kept things she couldn't yet bear to look at twice a day. Wendell found her in the barn that evening, hanging tobacco sticks from the rafters though the crop wasn't even close to cutting size. "Grandma," he said, "Burley's bringing 40 cents a pound if you're lucky. You could sell this hillside for hay ground and still owe half that tax bill." She kept working, hands sure despite her age. "This ain't Burley," she said. "Never was." That was the first anyone heard her say it plain. Wendell frowned, tobacco stick in hand. Then what is it? Odessa reached into her apron and pulled out the coffee can, lid rusted at the seam, and set it on the workbench between them. Your grandpa's seed, she said. Dark tobacco, fire-cured. Same kind his daddy grew before the war, same kind won ribbons at the state fair back when there was a fair for it. Nobody's grown it right in 30 years, because nobody's willing to do it the slow way anymore. The slow way meant everything modern farming had abandoned. No mechanical harvester could touch these plants. Each stalk had to be cut by hand, speared onto sticks, and hung in the barn over smoldering hickory and sassafras logs for 6 straight weeks, tended day and night so the smoke cured the leaf instead of scorching it. Odessa slept in the barn during curing season, a cot dragged beside the fire pit, waking every 2 hours to check the smoke. Her daughter had begged her to stop years ago. Odessa said the fire didn't tend itself, and neither had raising 4 children, and she'd managed that too. Furman Setzer, who farmed the ridge adjoining hers, stopped by one August afternoon under the excuse of borrowing a post-hole digger. He stood at the fence line a long while, taking in the size of the leaves, the neat rows, the smoke already curling faint from the barn roof though cutting was still weeks off. You know there ain't a warehouse left in 3 counties that'll grade dark-fired anymore, he said. Man in Mount Sterling closed his floor 2 years back. Where exactly you fixing to sell this? Odessa kept walking her rows. I'll find somebody, she said, though she hadn't yet and didn't say that part. Late July brought the setback. A hailstorm rolled through the ridge overnight, quarter-sized stones hammering the hillside for 11 minutes straight. Odessa woke to the sound and ran out in her nightgown with a bedsheet, trying uselessly to cover rows that stretched half an acre. By morning, 19 of her 98 plants lay shredded flat, leaves torn to ribbons, stalks snapped at the base. She stood at the top of the hill in the gray light, sheet still in her hands, and for the first time since Talmadge died, Wendell saw his grandmother cry. Verney heard about the hail before noon and couldn't resist saying, at the feed store counter, loud enough for 3 customers to hear, that maybe the Lord himself was trying to tell Odessa Kirkendall something about growing tobacco nobody wanted. Wendell, standing in line for fence wire, wanted to say something back. He didn't. He drove straight to the ridge instead, half expecting to find his grandmother packing it in. He found her on her knees among the wreckage, replanting what she could, propping bent stalks with twine and stakes cut from broom handles. 19 plants gone, she said without looking up, but 79 ain't. She kept working until dusk, and Wendell, against every practical bone in his body, knelt down beside her and started staking too. September came in dry and hot, exactly what dark-fired tobacco wanted and Burley did not. The surviving plants grew heavy and wide, leaves the size of elephant ears, the barn already smelling of wood smoke by the 2nd week of the month. Odessa cut the first stalks herself, speared them onto sticks, and hung them high in the rafters where the heat rose slowest. She built her first fire small, feeding it hickory bark shavings, and settled onto the cot with a thermos of coffee and the county letter folded in her apron pocket. 31 days left on the calendar nailed above the barn door. She barely slept those 6 weeks. Wendell came every evening after his shift at the lumberyard to feed the fire while she rested an hour, then woke her at the smell change, the exact moment green smoke turned to blue, the sign the leaf was curing right instead of scorching. Neighbors driving past at night saw the barn glowing faint orange through its cracks and figured the widow Kirkendall had finally lost her good sense entirely, sitting up burning fires over dead men's tobacco, while the tax man circled her land like a buzzard waiting on carrion. October the 9th, 6 days before the auction, the leaf came off the sticks dark as saddle leather, supple, sweet-smelling, exactly the color Talmadge used to describe as good bacon brown. Odessa had 98 plants worth of cured tobacco stacked and baled in the barn, and not one buyer lined up to take it. She sat on an overturned bucket that evening and allowed herself, for the first time all season, to wonder if Furman Setzer had been right about the warehouses. 2 counties over in Bardstown, A different kind of trouble had been building all summer. Blue mold swept through Kentucky's contract burly fields in a wet, relentless wave, and a separate blight hit the last commercial dark-fired growers in Tennessee's Robertson County that same August, wiping out the fields that supplied the cigar wrapper and snuff manufacturers who still needed real fire-cured leaf. None of this had reached Menifee County by radio or newspaper. It had only reached the phones of brokers who were, by the second week of October, calling every name in a leather ledger nobody had opened in a decade, a ledger with Talmadge Kirkendall's name still written in it, and beneath it, in pencil, his widow's. October 11th, a dust-covered pickup with Tennessee plates turned up Sturgill Ridge and stopped hard at Odessa's gate. A broker named Skeeter Tolliver climbed out, ledger in hand, asking if this was still a Kirkendall operation and if there was any dark-fired leaf left standing in Kentucky at all. Odessa, flour on her apron from that morning's baking, walked him to the barn without a word and pulled back the tarp. Tolliver went quiet. He ran a hand down one bale, lifted a leaf to the light, held it to his nose. Then he asked how many pounds she had, and when she told him, he pulled out a phone and made a call right there in the barn doorway, reading numbers off her bales to somebody on the other end, his voice climbing higher with every figure. By the next afternoon, 3 more trucks sat parked along the fence line, one from a cigar wrapper company in Louisville, one from a specialty tobacco co-op in Owensboro, one Odessa never did learn the name of. Word had passed broker to broker overnight, the way news of scarcity always does, faster than any truck could drive. Prices for dark-fired leaf, 40 cents a pound the week before, had jumped to 85, then to $1.10 by the time the third buyer arrived, each one afraid the others would clean her barn out first. Vernie Coy heard about it from a customer buying fence wire and drove up herself that evening, arriving just as Tolliver was writing Odessa a check with more zeros on it than the feed store's whole monthly till. Vernie stood at the barn door, watching bale after bale get loaded and weighed, watching the old woman she'd teased every Thursday for 2 years count out enough money to cover the tax bill 3 times over. She didn't say a word. She only watched the trucks pull out one by one, dust rising gold in the last of the light. 98 plants turned to more cash than the whole ridge had seen in a decade. Odessa paid the county clerk in full on October 14th, 1 day shy of the deadline, in cash counted twice across the counter, while the clerk kept glancing up at her like she half expected to wake from it. She drove home past the feed store, where Vernie stood out front sweeping a porch that didn't need sweeping, and this time it was Vernie who looked away first. Wendell found his grandmother that night back at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, looking out at the hillside stripped bare now, every stalk cut and cured and sold. "You knew," he said. She shook her head slow. "I didn't know a thing," she said. "I just wasn't willing to let go of the one thing your grandpa left me that still knew how to grow." The following spring, Odessa planted 98 hills again, same coffee can of seed, same slow fire come autumn. Furman Setzer fenced off 2 acres of his own ridge that April and asked her, plain as anything, if she'd teach him the curring. Vernie Coy started keeping a jar of Kirkendall black seed behind the register, free to anybody willing to try it, though she never did admit exactly why. Some things in a small town don't need announcing. They just get planted, 1 row at a time, in ground everybody swore was worthless, until the smoke from an old woman's barn turned out to be the only fire left burning when the whole county needed light.